Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Coburn, and today's episode we're going to be talking about college football Week 8 top 25 metric picks. Each week I collect all of college football team data, whether you're talking about offensive data, defensive data, special teams data, and from that data, I was able to look at what are the trends when it comes to winning football games. You know, what matters to winning? Is it the amount of points you put up, the amount of points you don't allow, fumbles, special teams, all that kind of stuff. And each week I basically do a little thing where I take all the data that really matters, score it, and then try to predict how games are going to end up on Saturday or Friday or Thursday based on the data that I'm able to get. I've done previous videos on this, so you can go to some of my previous videos in particular where I kind of explain in more depth. All terms and definitions will be in the description, so if you're new to the channel or new to some of the terms and stuff I'm going to be talking about, all that stuff will be there. But first off, I want to recap the week that was, which was the week that was kind of a nightmare when it comes to my prediction data. I did not do that bad, statistically speaking. I went 14-8 based on the predictions last week. It doesn't match the 17-4 prediction of the previous week, which was pretty good, by the way. 17-4 is definitely good. But you know, let's talk about it. So this is how the statistical model pretty much looked at the games of the week. So starting with the first, I guess I'll do part 1 and part 2. So part 1, we had, you know, Clemson versus Syracuse. That was, it predicted Clemson win and Syracuse won. All I chalk that up to, guys, is it's college football. Anything can happen. But one key point I want to point out is Clemson's field goal percentage has been eerily bad this season. We're talking significantly below average field goal percentage. And though that isn't a deal breaker, if your team is able to put up points on offense, prevent points on defense, and like if your team is able to do general things well, you're still going to win a lot of football games. But you have to understand that when you end up in games that are close and tight and you have that issue of field goal percentage, that's a big, like that can be a big eye-opener for a team like this. So you know, I chalk up the Syracuse win to 1. Just regular college football, stuff happens. You know, teams play really well, short week, going to, and facing Syracuse and all the other kind of stuff, who is not exactly the worst college team in college football. And of course, we get to the next game, California versus Washington State. Most of the data favored Washington State, and all I can really chalk this up to again is regular college football, short week. But on top of that, I mean, California has been a weird team this season. They've shown that they can get a lot of picks. They've shown they can create a lot of turnovers. You know, whether you're looking at the USC game where they were able to get a lot of picks in that game in particular, or the Washington State game. So they just showed up and took down Washington State. So I mean, I don't really have much else to say about it. I mean, it was pretty overwhelmingly favoring Washington State, but they just lost, in a short week. Then, of course, we look at Auburn versus LSU. Most of the data favored Auburn. LSU ended up winning. I might just chalk this up to the fact that LSU is getting a little bit better. You know, ever since that Troy loss, I think that was a wake-up call for them to kind of get their stuff together, so to speak. And I think because of that, they've made some adjustments and have slowly gotten better. So I kind of chalk it up to, two of those types of things. But that definitely was a loss. Then, of course, you look at Memphis-Navy. The data gave it to Navy. It was a pretty close matchup, though. Clash of styles as well. I mean, Navy is a completely different style of football team than Memphis, who is very pass-happy, very pushing it, passing game-oriented kind of team. So that's definitely kind of a clash of different styles, and Memphis' style ended up winning. Then we look at the next group of losses. So Michigan State versus Minnesota. The data favored Minnesota, very slightly favored Minnesota, but that of course went in Michigan State's hands, but it was a very close game. The data also had Utah over USC. And honestly, if the second half was the whole game, it would have been Utah. USC fought back, but Utah actually was up by a substantial amount of points, and they just kind of gave that game up. Then, of course, you got Boise State versus San Diego State, which I think, honestly, was just, whether you call it San Diego State getting in their head or thinking they're full of them, who knows. But that definitely, it's a rivalry game, and Boise State ended up winning that rivalry game. And then, of course, you got Arizona State versus Washington, which I honestly think that Washington is not as good as people think they are. They have won a lot of football games this year, but they were playing a really weak schedule. So I think it kind of chalks it up to that they had a lot of data that was showing really positive things, but they haven't actually played anyone of significance. So it kind of skews the data a bit. So I kind of chalk it up to that. But overall, again, 14-8 this week. Not the best week ever. Not 17-4 like the previous week, but still 60+% for the model is pretty dang good. It's not the best, but we'll see what happens going on to next week, which is what we're going to get to. So this is this week. So I looked at all the top 25 matchups for week 8. And again, this is all the data. So this is all that you can use the data however you want to use it. All the data is here. I'm just going to point out who the data favors, why the data favors them, and what are some things to look for, and then ultimately just give you all the picks based on the model. But when you look at the first game of the week, Iowa State versus Texas Tech, the data actually favors Iowa State. Ever since that Oklahoma game, Iowa State has just got a ton of confidence, improved a lot. But the biggest thing that favors Iowa State is their defense. They're very balanced. They have an offense that can put up points, and they have a defense that can prevent points. And I think those are two main factors as to why they're favored in that matchup. Then you look at Maryland, Wisconsin, heavily for Wisconsin, so I'm not really going to speak on that too much. I don't think Maryland beats them. I'd be very surprised. Then, of course, we got Oklahoma State versus Texas. This is a little bit closer, but it does favor Oklahoma State. They just are able to put up more points. Texas just can't put up enough points this year to help them out. So from that kind of perspective, that's why Oklahoma State is favored. North Carolina versus Virginia Tech has it heavily for Virginia Tech. North Carolina is not the North Carolina that people think they are. They have a very low win percentage. It'd be very unlikely that they were to take down Virginia Tech. So I don't, like, there's just not, you're going out on a limb, to say that. And then, of course, you got Indiana versus Michigan State. Most of the data in this particular game favors Michigan State, but fairly close matchup in terms of that particular game. Miami versus Syracuse. Even though Syracuse got a big win, Miami's still favored. Now, I will say this about Miami. I just have issues with Miami because they're consistently, like, they almost lost to Florida State. They almost the game they had against Georgia Tech, they were pretty much down, and then they fought their way back. Like, I worry about this team. Even though Miami is Miami, and they have been playing well, they've been putting up enough points to win. I just, so I don't think Syracuse takes down Miami as well. Like, taking down Clemson and Miami back-to-back would be amazing. I just don't see that. I think Syracuse beating Clemson was just more so just catching them at the right time, and I think that ultimately Miami will get the win over Syracuse. Then you got Alabama versus Tennessee. Heavily favors Alabama, of course. Alabama is pretty much one of the best teams in college football. Then, of course, you got Navy versus UCF. UCF heavily favored over Navy. Then we got Kansas State versus Oklahoma. Oklahoma is favored. Oklahoma, of course, did have a bad game against Iowa State. I mean, they lost a game, game against Iowa State, but most of the day it still favors Oklahoma. I mean, it's going to be a Baker Mayfield show. It has to be a Baker Mayfield show for them to win. But Kansas State always seems to catch one team. They tend to catch one team every year. I don't know if that's Oklahoma. I said this last week that Kansas State might be able to catch TCU, but they didn't. But this, I mean, who knows? You know, I just kind of throw, it's an anecdotal sort of statement. Then of course you got South Florida versus Tulane. South Florida favored. Michigan versus Michigan State. Penn State, Michigan versus Penn State, excuse me. Penn State favored. Notre Dame versus USC. Very close. Actually, not too close, but in Notre Dame's favor. The biggest issue I have at Notre Dame is they have an inefficiency when it comes to their passing game. Their completion percentage compared to the rest of college football right now is 9.71 out of 100, which is just not consistent. But they are able to put points on the board. They are able defensively to keep points off the board, and they're also able to create turnovers. So I would say that this definitely goes in Notre Dame's side of things to favor Notre Dame. But USC is such a I mean, for as much as we hate Sam Darnold, or at least some people hate Sam Darnold, or don't like Sam Darnold and just think that he's a bad quarterback and he's just meh. He's a very young quarterback, but he is able to do things. He's able to get his team to win games that they don't normally or shouldn't win. You know, basically, like they should not have won that Utah game, but he was able to rally them and get them that win over them. So when you have a guy like Sam Darnold around, anything is possible, but the data does favor Notre Dame. Then, of course, you got Arkansas versus Auburn. Most of the data here favors Auburn. Kansas versus TCU. TCU heavily favored. Here's an interesting one. Fresno State versus San Diego State. The data actually, in this particular game, the data actually favors Fresno State, surprisingly enough. The only difference, San Diego State has played a much tougher schedule. So even though the data favors Fresno State, I would actually kind of side with San Diego State, because a lot of Fresno State's data might be skewed from playing a weaker schedule, which is possible. But at the same time, I do think that San Diego State, San Diego State had just lost to Boise State, and they're going up against Fresno State. So I don't know, it's interesting. It's an interesting game, to say the least, in terms of how the data kind of looks at this one. Then last but not least, we have Colorado versus Washington State, and most of the data favors Washington State. I don't really think anything was revealed in the California game other than maybe turnovers. That Washington State is in the red when it comes to fumbles, interceptions, stuff like that, which was a big driver of the California win. But I just don't know. I mean, Colorado just doesn't put up enough points. I mean, there's not a lot else I could say, and their defense is not exactly that great. So there are some things that favor Colorado. I mean, one, they don't turn the football over a lot when it comes to fumbles, interceptions, stuff like that. They also have special teams advantage as well. Punt return yardage, kick return yardage, stuff like that. They do have that in their favor. So there is a case to be made that Colorado could get this win over Washington State if Washington State comes in flat and doesn't perform like they should, like they did against California. But I just think that when you have Mike Leach is Mike Leach. So I'd still tend towards Washington State, but I would say there are some indicators that could go in Colorado's favor if that's exactly the bet you want to make. It's not a safe bet, but there are some things that kind of go into that favor. So ultimately, and of course these are the regular picks. These are just the base, instead of me droning on about stuff, this is the picks. Wins, loss in terms of the games this week when it comes to the data. But to finish it out, ultimately, how do I feel about last week? It's college football, guys. You're going to have weeks like this. You're going to have teams that are going to have short weeks, and they're going to have this kind of result. And the one thing that I know is that I definitely have done a lot of aggregation of data, which has led to at least a winning percentage each week. For the most part, when it comes to college football pick'ems, but it doesn't exactly account for every single variable to predict everything with 100% accuracy, which takes time in the off season to get better with that kind of stuff. So, in the off season, I'm gonna be looking at things like short weeks. I'm gonna be looking at other sort of variables to consider, home field advantage, all that kind of stuff, to kind of get a better idea about things. But ultimately, hey, you know, again, you're going to have weeks like this. You're going to have weeks where everything doesn't go as well as it probably should or could go, but you can't get down about yourself. You just have to trust the process, trust that what you're doing is working, and move forward. And you know, so far we'll have a better week than we had last week. You know, we get back to that 17-4, right? Over the previous week. So of course, my name is James Coburn. You can find my other work at draftcoburn.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Geometrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well with anybody that you know, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.